Hi, my name is Zipporah, and I'm not sensitive, I'm just vibing. I hope everyone's week has been great. Mine has been kind of shitty. My apartment got broken into and my laptop got stolen, and as such, it has set me behind my schedule by about a week. This happened on Halloween weekend, which obviously ruined all the vibes except for the scary ones. But besides scary season with scarily exposed skin and scary break-ins, the US has been getting quite frightening, especially in the past couple of months for anyone who is a leftist. It has been pretty clear over the last year that both political parties that represent my country are against leftist ideology, and one particular party is dangerously close to criminalizing being too far left on the leftist spectrum. The most glaring example being President Trump designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. Now, I really hope that I don't have to tell my audience that Antifa literally means people who are anti-fascism. You know, that ideology we as a country have fought against in World War II. I also really hope that I don't have to tell my audience that Antifa is not an organization at all. But if I do, that's okay, because at the end of the day, what I am here to tell you is that I'm not sensitive, I'm just a leftist. Quite simply, a leftist is someone on the left side of the political, so a socialist, communist, anarchist, and everything in between. For example, you can be an anarcho-communist, someone who believes that the state should be abolished, and along with it, capitalism and private property. This kind of society would be organized through collective action, meeting the needs of anyone living in such a community. It basically rejects the idea that humans have to work, because if they didn't, they would be useless to society as a whole. I am pretty sure anarcho-communism is considered a far-left idea, which sounds violent for how non-violent the description actually is. Now, I want to take this opportunity to say I am not the end-all be-all of leftist ideology. This episode of INSJV will be my understanding of the main factions of leftist ideology, where I am on that spectrum, and why it's so demonized. A lot of people who are not on the left feel as if all leftists are the same, when we are all very different people with very different ideas. What connects leftists is that we are generally against capitalism, and we are working towards a commitment to social equity. My favorite leftists historically are the Black Panthers and bell hooks, because they were some of the most influential benchmarks to my journey on becoming a leftist. Personally, I usually say that I'm a leftist because I think it's cruel to force people to be part of a society that does not and will never support them if they are disabled, not straight, or not the dominant skin color of that society. Capitalism works because it is unfair, and it is why the world is in such a disarray with poverty, racism, and the obvious, climate change. The very idea of nations, armies, and corporations are enough to make me disgusted at how we as a species somehow evolved to a capitalist society. But we're getting off topic, so let's talk about the basic tenets of socialism. Economic equality, workers' rights, public ownership of resources, and the role of government in providing social welfare. Socialism is an ideology that can be traced way back in history. A great example would be Plato's Republic. He doesn't call it socialism. He does describe a type of collective society in which the society would be constructed of three types of people: producers, auxiliaries, and guardians. In simpler terms, workers, protectors, philosophers, and kings. In his society, people who were guardians would not own personal property. They would live amongst each other in a commune, and they would distribute resources and property over all of society. They're best thought of as referees because they don't play the capitalist game, they try to keep it fair. Auxiliaries are the soldiers, the armies, the police, basically the protectors of the order. Then we have workers. They are the producers of the resources that the state distributes. They can own property and play the game along with the auxiliaries. Sounds pretty cool until Plato mentions that these aren't choices an individual can make. If you are born a worker, you will continue to be a worker, and two workers usually can't make a philosopher or king. Which is why people point to Sir Thomas More and his Utopia. Sir More was a British chancellor who was famously beheaded because he refused to accept King Henry VIII, or what I like to call him, wife killer, as the head of the church. Before he lost his head, Sir More wrote Utopia, a satirical rewrite of Plato's Republic that describes a society based on rational thought. There would only be communal property, productive citizens, religious freedoms, no money, no class separation, no poverty, and no need for war or crime. In all honesty, as of now, I've only read excerpts and summaries of the Utopia. So, I don't feel very comfortable about judging it because, I can judge Plato's Republic because I've read it. But I would urge others to read Utopia because I have heard it's a good read and I think it helps the understanding of what socialism came from and how it has evolved throughout history. Now, history, Plato, and more gave us the groundwork of socialism, but we don't really see a political movement until we get to the French Industrial Revolution, when some radicals and a journalist named François-Noël Barbude argued for the abolition of private property and common enjoyment of land and its fruits. François was promptly executed, but quickly became a martyr for the socialist movement against industrial capitalism. The term socialist became the coined term to describe these radicals in the 1830s, subsequently cementing socialism into history. This next section of leftist history gets a little weird, so before we get into it, it's time to vibe with the times. Earlier, I mentioned how the Black Panthers and bell hooks were influential on my journey to becoming more than a liberal. There are many incredible leftists throughout history that have influenced the slow but steady move away from oppressive societies, and many of them were poor, disenfranchised people hungry for liberation. I'm encouraging you to find the people who inspired you and your life experience because that is what these people did for me. The Black Panthers, mainly known as the Black Power Defense Group, were also Marxist-Leninists. This very cool group, started by college students in 1966, grew to be quite an influential force for the Black liberation movement. Some of the ways they practiced leftist ideologies were creating and running a free breakfast program for thousands of hungry children. The program was so successful it went nationwide, and they ended up feeding more kids than the government and inspired federal programs to start feeding children in need. They also worked in solidarity with other disadvantaged communities. For example, in 1977, when people were fighting for disability rights, the Black Panthers provided food, blankets, and support during protests. The Black Panthers had done so much for so many people across the nation, but they were considered a terrorist group until the 2000s. Now, Bell Hooks was an amazing writer who opened up the world of feminist theory to Black girls and women. She had written over 40 books about politics, race, gender, love, and made them all to connect with her audience, Black women. A book I would recommend is All About Love, a book that challenges conventional ideas of love and connecting to social structures, self-awareness, and healing. This book was my first bell hooks book, and it made me think more about how societal structures impact how we love ourselves and others. A quote I'd like to read real quick from All About Love. Love is as love does, and it is our responsibility to give children love. When we love children, we acknowledge by our every action that they are not property, that they have rights, and that we respect and uphold their rights. This quote made me think of how our society has intertwined love and ownership, which creates the nuclear family myth while ignoring humans' communal instincts. It's a good book to help you just confront childhood traumas, your past and present relationship issues, and learning how to approach self-love. Now, historically is where things get weird. We know socialism was born through Plato, but then we have Engels and Marx who made the Communist Manifesto inspired by the socialist movement during the Industrial Revolution. To preface the rest of this conversation, Marxism is a philosophy, and communism is a system of government based on Marxist principles. The main principle being the liberation of the proletariat, aka the working class. And something to remember, though, is that not every Marxist is a communist, and not every communist is a Marxist. The way that I think about it is by remembering that Karl Marx was a person whose ideas got so popularized that communism, a governmental system, and Marxism, his philosophy, became interchangeable terms. Let's back it up a bit to socialism, Karl Marx, and Friedrich Engels, the building blocks of which communism was created. Basically, Marx and Engels believed that socialism, as it was imagined at the time, was more than just a silly dream, but an inevitable destination at the end of the hypothetical road of human societies. Their problem with socialism was that it still allowed for the ownership of property. It still allowed for some class in a society. It still allowed for companies power over the livelihood of the working class. I believe communism can be categorized into 6 types. There's Marxism, anarcho-communism, Marxist-Leninism, council communism, Austro-communism, and Euro-communism. There could be more, but these are the ones that I have found most prominently across the internet. And what they all have in common, which is what makes them communist, are that they advocate for the non-existence of private property, the dissolution of social classes, and putting the means of production in the hands of the state to properly be distributed amongst the people. Now we get to anarchists. Anytime people talk about anarchists, they get weird and start imagining the actual purge, which is crazy because in the movie The Purge, it was a state-sponsored event where they themselves were protected and left the citizens to murder each other because for some reason, humans just really wanted to murder each other. The truth of the matter is, anarchists are very similar to communists, as communists are to socialists. The difference is that anarchists don't want a transitional phase between the state as it is now, a socialist state, and a complete stateless communism. Anarchism argues that the state is inherently oppressive and that there is nothing socialism or communism can do to change that, so it calls for the immediate and complete dissolution and abolition for the state along with capitalism. Anarchism started spreading in the West in the early 20th century, in part due to the Great Enlightenment. Historically, one of the first people to call himself an anarchist was Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. In 1840, he published a study of the economic basis of society, What is Property?, in which he argued that society rules itself and does not need authoritative governments to be functioning. Now, when we start talking about how anarchism developed, I have to admit that this is where we get the bad or good PR, depending on how you feel about a bunch of ruling figures across the world being killed in the hopes to inspire the masses, one of whom was President McKinley. Anarchists became known as wildly independent and violent, which is really a shame because that isn't the end goal of an anarchist society. Since then, most of anarchist actions are creating programs that are intended to help people within those communities. In my opinion, that is the extent in which anarchists can actually make a difference today. Someone who explains it very well is Andrew Sage. He is an anarchist based in Trinidad, and his channel is dedicated to showing what anarchism is, how it works, and how it can work in the future. Now, we've gone through all of the basic forms of leftist ideology. I will say that these are not perfect definitions, examples, or descriptions. I did research and I tried to convey what I understood in a digestible way. But I know I'm not perfect, so feel free to correct me. I want to also mention that I mainly included the basic forms of what most people would say are the different ideologies in the leftist spectrum. There are so many ways these ideologies interact within themselves and other ideologies I haven't mentioned. And to touch more on where I am at, I have always described myself as an anarchist because at the forefront of my ideology is that any form of government will be authoritative or end up becoming authoritative. If it wasn't for that, then I'd probably be considered an anarcho-communist or a straight-up communist. The thing that I believe that really makes me anarchist, though, is that we really have to engage in direct action and mutual aid. I don't think there will ever be a moment where we are truly ready to change the world, but we might as well start in our own communities. This is obviously more easily said than done, especially when the actions are mostly volunteering your body and time for your community. And before I leave you for today, I want to speak on how my ideologies show up in real life. This weekend, my apartment got robbed. I lost my school laptop, which had a lot of important things on it, and they weren't easily recovered. I was very sad, and I still am, because at the end of the day, I'm just a student. I live off of savings I get from my summer and winter jobs, so I had to downgrade. There were also some sentimental stickers that I won't be able to recover, so it just hurts and it really sucks. I was never really mad though, except for when the police came to take a report. He obviously couldn't do anything about it, and he gave us some advice, but the main thing he talked about was how the homeless shelter was responsible. Because a homeless shelter opened up nearby, there is an increase of break-ins, addicts, and crimes, which makes sense. But instead of blaming a system that allows for such homelessness and addiction to exist, he blames people who are quite literally desperate, people who have been dehumanized, people who live out in the cold and have little to no way of lifting themselves out of poverty. I can't fully understand them, but I know that they are human, they're hungry, and they're cold. Our governments and economic systems allow that. And it is probably going to get a lot worse, especially in the US. And when it does get worse, there will be more crime, because the community doesn't support itself as it is now. Leftists, whose main focus is in community action, understand this, and I find they usually don't care to distinguish themselves from other leftists who do the same, so neither do I. I love the leftist community. I love the people who are dedicated to work for a better future and truly meet their neighbors where they're at. I think what makes us great is how different we are, how many ideas we have, and the bravery it takes to firmly stand outside of the norm. Even if you don't consider yourself a leftist, I'd like for you to consider what actions you can do that help your community. Donate your old clothes. Donate any canned foods you don't use. Donate some of your time at a food pantry or learn what the poor in your community need. At the end of the day, It's not about ideology. It's about remembering we share this world, so why not try and make it better, one step at a time? As always, sources are in the description. Thank you for listening, and remember, we're not sensitive, we're just vibing.